All right, so chapter 8 covers crime, business crime. And business crime is usually like way more boring than like the crime on movies and stuff. Occasionally there's cool business crime, but usually it's like more boring. So here's some examples, or not examples, but kind of what you see most often in business crime. There's actually employment opportunities in law enforcement that just focus on business crime. The FBI has business crime units, stuff like that. So usually they'll call it white collar crime. I don't know where that term came from. The idea is that you're not out there beating people up, but you're like using technology and business knowledge to steal from people and things like that. So it includes things like fraud, contract crimes, public corruption crimes. A lot of times, like I used to go out to the federal prison out here and do job interview practice sessions for people who were finishing up their term and were going to be getting out to help them kind of prepare to like transfer back into the real world and find a job. And we either found people that were like drug dealers or things like that, like low level usually, or people that I'd be like interviewing them and they were like way more sophisticated business wise than I was, because they were involved in white collar crimes. There was a guy I was interviewing who had been a colonel. That's a pretty high rank, actually a really high rank in the Air Force. The next rank up is general. And he had gotten out and done some government contracting and had taken a bribe and ended up with like a 3-year sentence for taking a $50,000 bribe. Because some company wanted him to steer the government contracts to them. And another guy who had, had his master's degree in finance from the Wharton School of Economics, which is like one of the best in the world. And he had same type of thing. He'd done some shady stuff, and he was up there serving his. So I was like, I'm trying to help them get ready for jobs, and these guys are like top tier business people before they went to prison. So mostly then my preparing them for a job is saying like, okay, probably any employer you try to hire with is going to ask you why did you do that? And so I try to ask them those questions to help them develop good answers as to, honestly, the best answer is something like, I served my country faithfully and I had a moment of greed and I succumbed to it and I paid my price and I never want to do that again. I betrayed my family and my country and something sincere like that, right? Anyway, so recognize that most criminals that you will deal with, if you ever have to deal with them, are people that are not as different from you as you think they are. In other words, they are people who are relatively normal people, but somehow got off track a little, and then that little went off track a little bit more and a little bit more until they're over here committing crimes. You can probably all think of times in your life where you had a decision point and maybe you made the wrong decision and started kind of going down a path and at some point realized, ooh, I don't like where this is leading me, and steered yourself back. But a lot of the criminals you deal with are people that just didn't steer themselves back. It kept building and building until, and then when you talk to them, they're like, no, I'm ashamed of, think about having to talk to your mother about the fact that you're going to federal prison for 5 years, especially when she raised you to be a good boy, that type of thing. All right. So other examples, crimes within a corporation. These would be things like fraud. People will manipulate earnings and stuff like that within a business. If you're ever managers or ever own your own business, recognize that a lot of crimes happen in business when people feel so much pressure to deliver certain results that in their mind, manipulating those results becomes, and taking the risk becomes a better option than not. And so try to devise systems as managers and business owners that don't put people in those situations, right? Try not to create if you're not perfect, you're fired sort of situation. That's what happens with a lot of them. And this field, if any of you are, actually like your accounting class, this field right here, like forensic accounting, is one of the fastest growing fields. They call it the most secure job in America. These are accountants who go back into records to find fraud. And so they work for the FBI, they work for state police agencies, they work for the IRS, as you can imagine. And their job is to kind of deconstruct things and say, okay, because most often when we have fraud, it's like mixed with a bunch of legal transactions, and then only some illegal transactions, right? So I've always wondered about going back and learning to do that, because I love that part of accounting where you get to sort of like dig out the stuff that's like something's off with this. Anyway, and then other things, corporations commit things like not complying with regulations or doing stuff in marketing that's illegal. We'll talk about some specifics in a minute, but and the most common employee crimes are what's called embezzlement. Anybody ever heard of embezzlement? Do you know what it means? You're nodding. Yeah, it's theft. It becomes embezzlement when it's theft from a position of trust. In other words, instead of like going and taking money that's not yours, it's like money you're authorized to handle because you work for the business. So you're allowed to touch and handle that money, and then theft under those circumstances. It's typically considered worse because not only is it theft, but it was also theft in a situation where you were entrusted with something. And so it's breaking trust and stealing instead of just stealing. So that's what embezzlement means. And then internal control issues, sort of like fudging numbers, or a lot. And often these things happen not because someone's trying to be bad, but because they're trying to do things the easy way, and then it gets bad. So I'll give you an example. I have a business, and luckily it's just a partnership. So it's my mother and I went partners on a business years ago. I sold the business. And so now our business's sole purpose is to receive the payments. We carry the note, so people pay it. And so every year I have to file a tax return that just says we got this much in payments, this much of it was return of principal, this much was interest. And so that's the taxable part. But like something like, it could be as simple as like me going like, oh man, I need a little bit of money right now. Instead of trying to go get a loan or use a credit card, I'll just pull $1,000 out of the business. That's fine. Okay. Because I'm going to put the 1,000 back. And then something happens and I can't get the $1,000 back in there. And then my mom's like, why is there like, right? That could turn into an embezzlement case. That could turn into me fudging the internal controls, which means we're always supposed to keep our business money separate from our personal money. Not because I was trying to steal or whatever, but just because I needed the money and I was going to put it right back. That happens to people. Now, probably it's a partnership with your mother, and you just said like, hey, mom, I'm going to take a draw from the business of $1,000. My intent is to put it back. Then it wouldn't really be a crime if the other partner was like, sure, you can do that, or you can, take a loan from the business or whatever. But people kind of like do it, and then the other partners are like, so you're pulling money out of the business, nobody else gets to pull money out. So recognize a lot of these business crimes don't start from someone like being evil and conniving. They fully intend to put the money back, or they, whatever. They're only getting around this restriction because it's a hassle, but they're going to still be honest. When I took over the AYSO league here, that's the American Youth Soccer Organization. The old commissioner, very honest, very good guy, but he hated, there was this hassle that all of the checks had to be signed by 2 board members, the commissioner and one other person, usually the treasurer. And it was such a hassle because whenever you needed to buy some equipment or something, you had to like call each other and figure out a time to get together and both sign. It was just a pain in the butt. So I opened up the checkbook when I became the new commissioner of the league. There's a bunch of checks that are already all signed by the treasurer. So now the commissioner doesn't have to chase the treasurer down. They could just sign it. That's an internal control measure. Okay. We put a measure like that in place to keep us from stealing, any one person from having too much ability to steal from the business. They bypassed it, not because they were being dishonest. In fact, they were being completely honest. They never spent the organization's money on stuff that wasn't for the organization. But it could have easily turned into a crime because he could have used one of those checks if he had been so inclined to do so, and she wouldn't have had, there would have been no ability for a second person to say, what's this check for? And why are we writing it? Right? So internal control issues bypassing the company's own security measures often turn into crimes that were pretty preventable before. All right. And then crimes against a corporation are things like kickbacks, antitrust violations, or so these are intercorporation crimes between corporations. A kickback is where somebody says like, yeah, we'll give you the contract, but then you have to pay something back to us, right? So kind of like a bribe. Let's say I control government jobs and I need to hire a contracting firm to build a government building. And I say, here's an idea. I'll give you the contract. You just price into the contract an extra $100,000. And then you pay that back to me once you get the contract. That's a kickback. It's making the getting of a contract contingent upon some sort of future payment. So slightly different than a bribe in the sense that you didn't come to me saying, I'll give you this money. It's me saying to you, and it's usually when somebody's controlling money that's not their own, like government money, saying, we'll give you this job in exchange, you'll pay us back. That's a crime, and it should be a crime, right? Antitrust, those are violations with like competition between businesses, things like unfair competition, those are antitrust violations. Securities fraud, this is often like manipulating our accounting so that it looks like we have more profits than we do, which drives our stock price up. And then we sell the stock and make a profit and then submit a corrected thing saying, oh, we didn't have the profits we thought we had or whatever. And then obstruction. This is usually somehow getting in the way of laws or trying to go around laws. Trying to keep, I'm trying to think of a good example of it. It could be something as easy as if you had to get a building permit to build a new building and you found some way to go around that and built your new building and then illegally. Okay, that's what obstruction means. All right, so who's liable if a corporation commits a crime? Because you can't really arrest a corporation. I mean, you kind of can, I guess, but not really. So it is the officers and directors of a corporation. So that means the chief executive officer, usually, anybody that's like at a senior level, like a senior vice president, and then the board of directors. They can actually go to prison for crimes committed by the corporation if they authorize the conduct or if they knew about the conduct and did nothing about it. Now, if say you had employees that were doing illegal things and you truly didn't know anything about it, you probably can't go to prison, but you'll still be harmed financially when the corporation that you're an officer or director of and probably a major shareholder in gets fines and sanctions, right? But you can go to prison if you knew about it. So even on a small business level, think about this. You know, you work for a small family-owned company. You know, if your boss told you to, I don't know, steal from the company so that they could then file an insurance claim and get the money back, and then, wouldn't just be you that would go to jail. They could go to jail for it too, is what we're getting at. If they, so, all right. So there is a law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which you'll probably read about in the chapter, if you actually read through the chapter, that ties in with the federal sentencing guidelines. And this act and these federal sentencing guidelines have done more to reduce business crime than many other things the government has done over the years. In essence, what they've said is if you meet these 11 conditions, then as a member of a board of directors or a senior executive in a company, you can be exempt from prosecution because following these steps is a way of saying, I wasn't encouraging people to be dishonest. I was unaware they were being dishonest, and I had steps in place and they still broke the law. Now we can just say, clearly this person tried really hard to break the law because they went around all these steps. So these are the steps. If you have a code of ethics, one, if you do training on that code of ethics, so you can show all of your employees have had to learn the code of ethics, you have a company hotline and an ombudsman, which is like a person who people can talk to if they see a violation of the ethics. 4, if you protect employees who report violations. investigate all allegations, report all violations immediately and voluntarily, offer restitution to affected parties, cooperate and negotiate with regulators, admit your mistakes and shortcomings, be forthright and public with your code of ethics, and continually evaluate the effectiveness of your compliance program. So if you have this in place, then you'll be protected to an extent as a senior leader of the company if something bad goes down with the company. But again, you have to prove you really have that. You can't just be like having it in name only, but you don't actually live it, right? You have to show that you really live it. Meaning if somebody reports something, you keep them safe for reporting it and you report it to the authorities. So this thing has really helped because a lot of organizations have created these ethics rules and then have made a real effort to do them. And funny, when you have things in place that you actually have rules and you help and allow people to report violations without getting in trouble, you tend to have less ethical issues in an organization. All right, so what's it take for something to be a crime? If you watch crime shows, you might recognize some of these terms, okay? We're always going to bust them out in Latin just so that they feel like important. The first is what's called mens rea, M-E-N-S-R-E-A, mens rea, which means criminal intent. In other words, if somebody doesn't have intent, then they're not committing a crime. So for an individual, if I kill somebody, okay, depending on the level of intent I have, it will change what the crime is. So if I have what's called malice aforethought, which means I plan to hurt or kill, I plan to kill this person and then made a plan and went into that and executed that plan, that's first-degree murder. So in that case, I have criminal intent to murder and I acted upon that. Second-degree murder, you guys know what that involves? I have criminal intent to harm the person but not kill them, or criminal intent to commit some other crime, robbery. Like so I'm robbing you and I kill you, but that was not my intent, right? Like or we're in a fighting match in a bar and I accidentally kill you. Okay, it's not really accidental in the sense that you had intent to harm this individual. You totally intended to assault them and the assault went too far. Okay, so that'd be second-degree murder. Manslaughter, you know what that one is? Manslaughter is negligent homicide. So this one's a little different. There's no intent to harm or kill somebody. There's just this sort of intent to not be careful, right? And so, you know, a lot of times drunk driving and you kill somebody. You never meant to hurt anybody. You're just trying to get home after you were drinking. But you still had intent in the sense that you were not safe to be driving and you chose to drive. So there's still mens rea even in that situation. So as opposed to complete just an accidental death, which happens sometimes, right? I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I wasn't even really negligent. Just my actions led to somebody else dying. And then if there was no intent at all, it's not a crime. And so and then self-defense is sort of a way of saying there was no criminal intent. There was intent to defend myself or others, but no criminal intent. I have a legal right to defend myself, okay? So mens rea means criminal intent. Sometimes they call it scienter, which I don't know why, but so that's the first element. In order for something to be a crime, you must have mens rea or criminal intent. There is a doctrine called conscious avoidance that gets brought up a lot in business crime. What conscious avoidance means is like, don't tell me, don't tell me, don't tell me. I know bad stuff's going on over there, but don't tell me. That's a conscious avoidance. In other words, you know bad stuff's going down, but you keep yourself outside of it. They consider that still criminal intent, okay, at least to an extent. Because it's one thing if you really didn't know stuff was going down, you know, but what is your duty? If you know a crime is happening, you see somebody attacking and beating up a person and robbing them, Do you have an obligation under the law to jump in the middle of that and protect and risk your own life? What do you think? No obligation under the law. You might have a moral obligation. You may feel, even if I have to risk myself, it's the right thing to do, protect this person, right? But not everybody would feel that could have a difference of opinion on that. No legal obligation, but you do have some legal obligation to intervene in some way. Call the police. That's a legal intervention, right? To just say this is going down on the corner of 5th and 8th Street or something like. And so same idea, if you are a corporate officer, so again, a high-ranking executive or on the corporate board, you cannot avoid liability by distancing yourself from the preparation of the financial statements. Like, I didn't know they were making bad financial statements because they just make those. What they're saying is, no, senior directors and corporate officers, they need to understand that process and have an obligation to be part of it. Communication and contact with those who prepare the statements is sufficient to establish knowledge. Email and text messages can be used to show intent. All right. You guys can check that out if you want to. It's pretty cool. Consider 8.3 in the book, 11-year-old's attempt to rescue a baby woodpecker and how that relates with business crime. All right. But we don't have time for it right now. Second element. So we have mens rea, criminal intent. The second is what's called actus reus, or doing the act of the crime. If I have intent, I want to kill that guy, but I never act on it, I don't kill him, I haven't committed a crime. We've all probably wanted to, maybe not kill somebody, but we've been mad at somebody and wanted to fight them or something, or wanted to secretly wish bad things to happen to them and then felt guilty about secretly wishing that. Maybe that's never happened to you. She's like, no comment. All right. All right. So intent alone is not a crime. So usually the level of conduct, how far we act, determines what another determinant, right? So if I had, let's go back to intent to kill somebody, and then I took some steps toward it. I purchased the gun, the duct tape, the trash bags. What else do you get when you're going to kill somebody? You seem like you thought about this quite a bit. But then I drive to their house and I'm waiting for them to come out of the house, and then I chicken out. I'm sure that's happened, right? Someone wanted to kill somebody, got really close, and then chickened out. I've probably committed a crime already. It's called conspiracy to commit murder, because I've made this whole plan, but I didn't commit murder. Does that make sense? And so there's another way they sort of level up crimes. One is the level of intent, and the other is the level of action. How far did we take it? And of course, the best defense to a crime is that you didn't actually commit it, right? I never did it. I thought about it, but I didn't do it. And it says sometimes failure to act may constitute a crime. For example, if you fail to pay your taxes. So usually a crime is doing something you're not supposed to, but it can be not doing something that you are supposed to do. That can be a crime too. All right, so some examples of business crimes: theft, which is taking property that is not yours, and you have to have an intent to take the property. So like if you accidentally take, like I have my laptop that belongs to the college. Let's say I take that home and then I get fired, and that it's sitting in my closet or something, and 6 months later the college calls the cops and like, he stole property when he left. They would have a hard time convicting me of that. It'd be like, there was no intent to take that. I had it at home when I got fired. I left it in my closet. As soon as they asked for it, I gave it back to them. It would be hard for them to prove intent. Okay, so I've got to have the intent to take the property, the actual taking of the property, and have no authorization to take the property. So again, the argument would be, at the time I took it, I had authorization to take it, and then it all got confused in this situation. So that's what theft is. Theft just means taking property that's someone else's. Embezzlement, we talked about that a minute ago. Intent to take property, actual taking the property for use, and then by a person entrusted with the property. check this out. Temporary use is still a crime. So remember my saying, like, I want to take the money out of my business and then I'll put it back. Well, even if I was fully intending and I was gonna put it back, it's still embezzlement. I'm not allowed to take money out. Now, when it's my own business, that's different. Now, if I take money out of my own business, that's in essence like either an owner's draw if I'm a non-corporate entity, or if I'm a corporate entity, it's a dividend. Okay. But as soon as I have one partner, then if I steal $1,000 from the partnership, I've taken a $500 draw and stolen $500 from my mother. Does that make sense? Unless I have her permission or something like that. Or if I take 1,000 and give it to me and 1,000 and give it to her, okay, now we've just both made partner draws on the business. That's totally legal. So a lot of it has to do with intent and action. Obstruction of justice. So an intent to impede, obstruct, or influence an investigation. Asking witnesses to lie. Altering or destroying evidence, like documents and things like that. You can get 10 years for that. That one could be, so Arthur Andersen, this is a accounting firm. There used to be the big 5 accounting firms. Now there's a big 4 accounting firms because Arthur Andersen disappeared after all of this. They were the accountants for Enron Corporation. And when everybody found out that they were doing all these fake shell corporations and making loans out to them, and Arthur Andersen went back and checked their paperwork and found out they really did know something was up there. Some bosses high up ordered employees to shred all that paperwork, destroy all the evidence. They committed obstruction of justice. 10 years in prison. That's a long time for shredding some papers. But the idea is, the moment you know that a criminal action could be pending, you can't destroy stuff. And so the law says if you're an auditor, which is what Arthur Andersen was, you have to retain all paperwork for 5 years. So if it was 6 years old and the government comes calling and you say, I'm sorry, we destroyed that year's worth of stuff last year, you haven't committed any crime. But even if it was 6 years old and they could find evidence that you had that paperwork, and then as soon as you found out they were coming, you destroyed it, then you've committed obstruction. Okay. So it's stuff that, again, sometimes clearly these people were trying to break the law. They're hiding evidence, but other times you run afoul of the government for what you thought was an honest thing. Like, oh, I only kept stuff for 3 years. You didn't know the law was that you were required to keep it for 5. And so those are laws that are important to know about whatever kind of business you're running, what the rules are. More and more crime is internet crime. That's probably not a big surprise. Unauthorized access to computers. So when we break into other people's password protected stuff, that's a crime. Okay, it violates their rights. Wiretap Act. So we're not allowed to. So they gave an example: an employee who set up forwarding for his supervisor's emails in order to learn if he would be fired. So he was afraid he was going to be fired. So he set up that all of his boss's email would come to him and to his boss. And then he was keeping tabs on it. And that's where the courts decided that falls under, it's the same as wiretapping, like listening in on someone's calls. Now, your employer being able to read all your emails doesn't fall under that because they own the system. And most of the time, most places will tell you, like, hey, we reserve the right. If you use our internal email system, know that it's not private. And so that's different than secretly reading other people's communications. Okay. Unauthorized use of computer resources. So the unauthorized use, downloading, copying, duplicating, uploading, or transmitting of trade secrets. This usually doesn't mean, like, you're not going to get prosecuted if you're watching like YouTube at work or something, or looking at your Instagram account while you're at work. That's not really usually a crime. That's more of a like employee handbook thing. They might be able to fire you if that's against the rules or something. So this is more like, I go into my employer and I like download some information that I'm not supposed to have, and then do something with it, sell it to another business or one of our competitors. That's what that's intended to be. And then spam, it's a horrible name for a law, but controlling the assault of non-solicited pornography and marketing. So that's what CAN spam law is about. So you know how, like, if you guys get emails you don't want, spam email, you can go to the bottom of it and hit unsubscribe, and they have to unsubscribe you, and they'll usually have a little disclaimer that says it could take up to 2 weeks. And so that's all part of that law, okay, this CAN spam law, that that they have up to 2 weeks to be able to stop emailing you stuff. But in theory, if they keep sending you stuff after you've asked them not to, you can file a complaint and they can get fined. And think about it, a spammer, how many people do they send out to? If everybody filed a complaint, it could be huge, because it's like up to like $7,500 per occurrence. So, if 10 people did that, that's 75,000. If 100 people, that's 750,000. So most businesses now are pretty good about getting you off their mailing address if you hit unsubscribe. And that falls under that law. Same thing, Counterfeit Access Device, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is just more of the same. Just know, unless you go into a business that is like super computer oriented, really what you need to know is pretty much common sense, which is you can't break into people's computer systems and steal their information. That's a crime. You can't go to your employer and steal information that's proprietary to them and sell it to other people. That's a crime. You can't continue to pester and bother people after they've asked you not to. That's a crime. Okay, to me, those are common sense. You don't have to be an expert, but we do have to have, like here at the college, we're big enough that we've had to have either, in some cases, have an expert who works for us, or in some cases hire a third-party firm who's experts in stuff like to what level do we need to make all of our web-based material accessible to those with disabilities? Because the American with Disabilities Act has been expanded to online stuff too. And so, if a person who's blind can't use a reader so that it will read our page to them in a way that's cohesive, we're in violation of that act. And so, a lot of entities are spending a lot of money to comply with these laws. And sometimes it's very frustrating when you're like, how many people are going to actually use this? We have to spend thousands of dollars to retrofit the website for 10 people who will actually use the feature. And the answer is, yeah. So you follow the law. All right, cyberbullying, cyber stalking, bots and online ticket sales. I think we're going to see a lot more with bots in the future and AIs. Already, did any of you ever feel like when you look at Amazon reviews, you're not sure you can trust them because there's been bots that have been like giving positive reviews and stuff like that? Yeah, and so I think if you could prove that, it's a crime. Okay, the whole intent of reviews is to help consumers make informed decisions, and if you're lying there, then that's a crime. But it'd be hard to prove. Well, it depends, right? All right. Copyright crimes have become a bigger issue with the internet because now all copyrighted material is in a format that can pretty much be copied and pasted, and so that becomes an issue. And yeah, there's some interesting cases about drug dealing and pornography. Are they still crimes online? Because we tend to think like pornography, as an example, is unstoppable in essence. If people are going to do it, they're going to do it. And the online realm has just opened that bigger. But some types of pornography are still illegal. Child pornography, as an example, right? Pornography that depicts people who are under the age of 18. Still illegal. Doesn't matter if you did it online instead of giving out physical pictures or something like that. All right. Other types of crimes: fraud, obtaining money, goods, services, or property through false or misleading statements. That's what fraud means, if you've ever wondered what that is. It's in essence theft by lie, okay? So it's not really theft, it's like getting you to give me money, so that's not theft. I didn't take it from you, you gave it to me, but I did so under false pretenses, okay? So it requires, the intent that it requires is intent to defraud. In other words, I lied to you or misled you with the intent of getting you to give me property or money or whatever, okay? Commercial bribery, again, like I mentioned before, paying off one entity to, again, it usually involves somebody who controls the funds of a company or a government organization, receiving personal payments in order to give the contract to. That never happens in Mexico, does it? No, it's an issue there, I've heard. I have a friend who's a contractor who did a lot of work down in Mexico, and he said it's just kind of the norm. It's kind of like how government officials get paid. Is they don't even call it bribery, they call it like facilitation payments. Like you pay a certain fee to me and I'll ensure that your paperwork gets put into the right people. And what's hard about that is in some countries, those facilitation payments are normal. They're not considered criminal. It's a normal part of business. I don't know what Mexico's laws are, but in some countries that's the truth. But American law does not allow for American businesses to pay bribes. So if they do it, even if it's not illegal in the country they're doing it, they've still committed a crime in America. And so that's tough because in some companies you almost can't function if you're not allowed to do those facilitation payments. So that's what makes international business so hard, is you've got to understand the laws there and the laws here, and how even doing something illegal there could still put you in violation of American law. And so you've got to understand that. And then RICO laws. RICO means racketeering and those related crimes. And racketeering is like mob stuff, okay? And so this was like, I don't know if you've ever heard of Al Capone. Anybody ever heard of Al Capone? So they had a really hard time arresting him for all the gang stuff his gang was doing. So RICO, or racketeering and organized crime, is what RICO stands for. It was put in place to help them recognize a pattern of low-level crimes that probably indicate more organized crime. Things like money laundering, which is like you take illegal money that you make from like robbery or selling drugs, and then you run it through a legitimate business so that it's hard for anybody to tell that it came from illegal sources. This is why the mobs got so involved in things like the legal gambling casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City, New Jersey, because those are places where people pay in cash, get chips, play the games, and then get paid out in cash. So they could run a bunch of extra cash into there that they were making through illicit drug sales and murder for hire and all sorts of terrible stuff. And it was very hard for the government to recognize which was illegal money and which was not. So that's, money laundering, murder, kidnapping, bribery, extortion, fraud, even like, so if you have 2 or more consecutive violations of these sorts of things, they can charge you, in addition to, for those crimes, they can charge you under the RICO Act, which enhances the sentencing because it looks like it's organized crime. Al Capone was actually arrested on tax evasion charges. That's all the government could get him on. Hi. That's all they could get him on was tax evasion. Then he died in prison, I think of syphilis. So good on him, I guess. I don't know. You're like, that's what happens to bad guys. Scarface. And the USA Patriot Act, which is a money laundering control act. So it was before 2001, we had the Money Laundering Control Act, and then the USA Patriot Act kind of updated that to, in essence, say it was put in place. What happened in 2001? September 11th, 2001. To recognize a lot of the money laundering that was happening in the United States was either criminal organizations like gangs or terrorist organizations. Okay, that's who gets dirty or foreign money from questionable sources and is trying to make it into legitimate money. So in essence, businesses and banks that have transactions in excess of $10,000 must comply with certain compliance requirements. But that's what sucks about that, is that means if I got $10,000 from, doing work for people and I kind of saved it up, if I deposit that in my account, the bank has to report me to the federal government, which is not going to, I didn't do anything wrong, but the federal government's going to scrutinize it, right? And be like, what's this guy doing? And so if I start doing a lot of those sorts of things, they're going to be like, what are you doing over here? And it could get me audited or something else that before I wouldn't have had, even if I was being totally honest. But the intent is that most people don't make a bunch of transactions over $10,000 in cash. It just doesn't happen that often. And so it added the scrutiny on that. There's other federal statutes like OSHA violations, and if here MSHA, which is mining safety and health, is a bigger issue than OSHA because our biggest employer is a mine, but same idea. If a company is violating those rules, doing dangerous things, they're breaking laws. Antitrust, which like I said, has to do with like having monopolies or teaming up with another competitor to like jack up the prices on the customers, those sorts of things. And it should be, oh man, I forgot this was a long one and we started late. So the Fourth Amendment, remember that guarantees us a right to privacy and protects us from search and seizure. That in order for us to be searched by the government, there has to be a warrant in place, and a warrant is only issued by a judge. So if the government wants to search your stuff, in essence, they have to go to a judge and say, this is why we want to search it. And the judge has to say that meets a certain level of probable cause for me to sign off on this. Police officer can't just come search your house because they want to. Okay. The Fourth Amendment, also exceptions to warrant requirement is what they call an exigent circumstance. Like, let's say I come up and I hear the shredder going back in there and I think you're destroying evidence, I can just like bust in. Also an exigent circumstance, like if you hear someone yelling, help me, they're keeping me captive here. The cop doesn't have to be like, hold on, I'm gonna go get a warrant, right? They can just kick in the door and come in. Or the plain view exception, right? When the cop stops you and he sees the baggie of weed sitting on your back seat, not weed anymore, sorry. Something worse than weed, I guess. Then they could say they can go ahead and force you to let you search the vehicle because they saw it. What's crazy about that is even if it was oregano and the cop thought it was weed, he's protected because you had something that looked like weed sitting there. Okay. So privileged documentation, any notes we make or any conversations we have with our attorneys or doctors can be protected. Attorneys more than doctors. And then any records that we have in possession by a third party. So if, you know, like I do my taxes on TurboTax, so Intuit has all of that records, the police can still get access to them via warrants. Don't think that because some third party's holding your information, it's fully protected, because they can still get a warrant to see that. And that's that. So hopefully, I know it's always quick to try to run through all of this stuff, but hopefully you know a little bit more about crime than you knew at the beginning. And as you read through the book, you'll know even more. So that's all we have for today. And I'll see you on Wednesday, and we will start class on time that day, I promise.